The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
To what do we owe this gorgeous weather? Wow, wasn't expecting yesterday. 82 degrees, low humidity, nice breeze. A little warmer today, but yeah, pretty much the same thing. I mean, June, God, we had some days in June, just brutal. Sunday was terrible. And looks like it's going to heat up again at the end of the week. I mean, love to have this weather for the weekends instead of the week, but at least it's not, 97 degrees with high humidity today. So we'll take it. We'll get to the James Wood debut last night, free agency in the NFL, and go behind the music a little bit on Jay Billis, who did one of those South Beach conversations with Dan Le Batard. And, if you've followed his career as I have and have enjoyed his work and even remember, as I do, watching him play at Duke, there's some real interesting backstories there, which we will get to in the next hour. But first, before we get to all that, it is Dexter Manley's 65th birthday. And I don't think there's anybody more surprised to be turning 65 than Dexter Manley himself. I've gotten to know him a little bit over the years, followed his career, covered him as a player, did a podcast with him 6 or 7 years ago. And I've always found him to be a very, very warm person. Now, he's got personal demons, and all credit to Dexter for overcoming them. I mean, the things that he has gone through in his life are absolutely unbelievable. And there are some stories, some of which I could tell, some which I can't tell, about things that went on when he played for Washington. His career ended because of drugs, failing a drug test, had a cocaine problem, went to jail, and lost everything at one point, was able to get some of it back. And he is a great ambassador for the team. And, I've heard things, you've heard things as well about how awful it was for him. The football life that they did on the NFL Network was outstanding. And one of the stories featured my friend Steve Buckhantz, who was the sports director at Channel 5 when Dexter had gone on a drug bender and had wound up in a hotel room in Houston. And he called Buck. This was one evening as they were getting ready to do the 10 o'clock news. And he said, I want my ashes to be spread over RFK Stadium. He was, at that point, suicidal. And I don't know, Buck managed to get to the police. They were able to trace the call or somehow. And fortunately, Dexter did not kill himself. He did later go to jail, got out of jail, has made a new life for himself here in Washington, had a couple of kids, is divorced. I think he's now remarried. And just the reckless nature of his life. And if you watch this football life on the NFL Network, you'll get a picture of just how it was for him growing up. He did not learn how to read, but the one thing about Dexter that's always helped him is he is very, very street smart. And he managed to get through 4 years at Oklahoma State without knowing how to read, because he would sit in the front row of the classroom and absorb as much as he could, and somehow was able to get through the tests. It wasn't like he was skipping classes and they were just covering up for him, though, who knows what his grade point average was. But he was there for 4 years under Jimmy Johnson, the coach there at that time, before he went to Miami and then later to the Cowboys. And, he was drafted here, and he was a freak. He was 260 pounds, and he could run 4.4, 4.5, and he was a gunner on kickoffs and other things before he settled in as defensive end. And I just look at him at age 65, and if he were sitting here, I would say, Dex, how did you make it this far? I mean, everything he did, so much of what he did, was self-destructive. And somehow he's been a survivor because of his will to survive and his ability to overcome so many of the problems that he's had. Not that he doesn't have problems now. And on top of everything else, he collapsed one day, not because of the drugs, but it turned out he had a cyst on his brain that had to be removed. Just one thing after another with him. And I remember this when I was on the committee to select the 70 greatest Redskins of all time. Did this in 2002, pretty early in Dan Snyder's tenure. And, he was all about marketing, and he thought this would be a good idea to do this every 5 years, have the greatest players. And they've stayed to this to some extent. I think the last one was, 85. We're coming up. We not reached... Yeah, I guess we have reached 90 years. Whatever it is, they've kind of, phased that out. They may go back to it with the new ownership. But I was on the committee with George Allen. This was before Bruce Allen joined the team as the president. So this was George Allen, the then former governor of Virginia. And we were discussing candidates for this honor, 70 Greatest Redskins. And the name Dexter came up. And to me, he's a slam dunk, obviously should have been on the list. And George Allen wanted to keep him off because of the drug issues. And I said, hey, everything that Dexter has done has not been destructive to others. It has been destructive to Dexter himself. And surprisingly, backing me on this was Dan Snyder. This was the only meeting. We had about 6 meetings or so. This is the only meeting I remember him attending. And Snyder backed me and said, no, Dexter needs to be among the 70 greatest. And he is. And he is as beloved a figure as has ever played in Washington. We've had some, the 4-minute ovation for Art Monk when he went in the Hall of Fame. Darrell Green is getting his number retired this year. John Riggins had the signature play in the franchise history with the 4th and 1 against Miami in the Super Bowl. Sonny Jurgensen is beloved. His number, rightly so, retired. There have been some players like that. But in terms of relating to the fan base, and we all have problems that we've had to overcome. I think what Dexter has done with his life, with all the problems that he created, mostly for himself, and to be able to keep coming back, to get off the mat, all credit to him, and a happy birthday to Dexter Manley, who turned 65 today. Just 21 years old, James Wood, who made his major league debut last night after tearing it up in AAA. I mean, he was tremendous before he got here, and questions came up. Well, what's he doing down in the minor leagues anyway? But in just a very short period of time, he had .353 with 10 homers and 37 runs batted in. He was tearing it up in AAA, and the time had come to bring him up. It was just a question of when it would happen. It happened last night, and this was Davey Martinez talking about it before the game.
I thought he'd be up here this year. I didn't know when, but he was progressing really well. He really was. I mean, I saw him in spring training. He faced some big league pitchers. Even though it was spring training, he held himself well. The biggest thing for me offensively is to accept his walks. He's got to accept his walks, and if he does that, he's going to do fine.
You made your debut once as a player. What does it stay like? What is he feeling right now?
He should be a little nervous, but I played for 17 years and I was nervous every day. So, but that's part of the game, But he's got, we talk about Mitchell Parker having no heartbeat. He's kind of that way too, He slows everything down. He understands he needs to be where his feet are. So I love him. I guess you guys talked to him today. He's very quiet. I'm sure he's very quiet. So, but that's how he is.
You kind of led me into this question. How do you know when he's excited, when he's nervous? How do you actually know?
Hey, I love the way I know that he's going to go out there and play hard for us. That's what I know. So, I'm excited to be here with him. I'm excited to help him as much as I possibly can. But he's definitely going to help our team.
And he did get a walk last night, but more importantly, in his first at bat, he had a single that smoked through the infield, hit what they measured it at 106 miles an hour. He looked very good in left field. He moves really well. He's not the first 6'7" outfielder in Washington history. That was Frank Howard, who, by the way, was an All-American basketball player at Ohio State, was drafted by the Philadelphia Warriors before he decided to play baseball for the Dodgers. And he certainly had size and athleticism, but nothing like this. I mean, James Wood looks like he could play small forward in the NBA. I mean, he would have had to have developed in a different way, but I've seen some video of him playing basketball at St. John's. He didn't just play baseball there. And to play basketball at St. John's, that's high-level high school stuff. And he looks like a real athlete. So really acquitted himself well. They lost the game last night, 9-7. And, as they get closer to the trade deadline, it looks like more likely that they're going to be sellers rather than buyers. But he's here to create some excitement. He's brought some excitement last night. They had 26,000, not terrible for a Monday night game. And David Martinez says he seems to be well equipped to handle being in the spotlight right now.
You think about it, he's had the spotlight for a while now. You look at ESPN, you look at all the polls. He's in top 10 in prospects, so he understands what comes with him playing here. So, like I said, my job is to kind of get him through it and help him understand what we're trying to do, what he's supposed to do, and go from there.
More behind the scenes stuff. Mike Rizzo was on the MLB network yesterday with Brian Kenny, and we've been talking about James Wood since they broke camp to open the season, and he looked great in spring training. He was bopping a bunch of home runs, and a lot of people say, well, what is he doing going down to the minor leagues? This guy looks major league ready. And this is Rizzo to Brian Kenny yesterday on why they decided to send him down before finally bringing him up yesterday.
At 20 years old, 21 years old, coming out of spring training, there was a few things that we wanted to focus in on. First of all, I always like to have our players get a couple of hundred at bats at the AAA level, no matter what their age chronologically is. So we thought coming from without any AAA at bats out of spring training would have been dangerous for his development. So wanted to get him a couple of hundred at bats at the AAA level. Don't forget, at 20 years old, at the AA level, his strikeout rate was about 33%. So we certainly wanted him to cut down on the strikeouts, to increase his walk percentage, see more pitches, and really focus in on a couple of those things. His base stealing and base running has come a long way. His routes and angles in the outfield. We wanted him to play all three outfield positions at the AAA level, and to face some left-handed pitching. And every test that we gave him, every goal that we shot at him, he exceeded with flying colors. So we thought that he's done everything he needed to do to get to the big leagues. Tweaked his hamstring a little bit. That sent our calendar back a couple of weeks, but he seems to be. Our medical people seems to think he's 100%. He's performed a couple of 9-inning stints at AAA, and we figured that this would be a good time to get his feet wet in the big leagues.
And he did get his feet wet last night with a hit and a walk. This is more from Rizzo on what the future might hold for Wood, who is now playing left field.
Yeah, he's proved to us that he's center field quality. He's, again, working on, he's got such long strides and he lopes after balls and that type of thing. But his routes and angles have improved dramatically this AAA season. With the makeup of our team, today and going forward, we're not sure what outfield position he'll play, but we know he's going to hit in the middle of the order and play somewhere out there. So we wanted him to get some experience at all three positions. He's been really absorbent with information, and he's a quick learner, and he's a student of the game. So he plays all three positions terrifically. He's a good center fielder that can stay in center field if need be, and it gives us a lot of options. Give Davey a lot of options of where to put him and what place in not only defensively but in the lineup.
Well, it's amazing how, the Juan Soto trade is working out for you. Again, kudos to you. Jump-started your whole rebuild. Take a look here. I mean, C.J. Abrams going next level this year. He was already good last year, but now he's a real slugger as well. Mackenzie Gore having another excellent year. You see the war, like total war for Soto and even Josh Bell, and then those two so far, and you've still got guys in the minor leagues, and now here comes James Wood. Tell me about getting that deal and getting the haul that you needed for the Padres. For them, they could have had him for three playoff runs. I guess that was the allure, right?
Yeah, it was the right place at the right time for both franchises. We were in different positions. We didn't think we could get a deal done with Juan. It's been well noted and documented. So we felt that our best option for our long-term success and to sustain a long playoff run, which is what we're trying to do, was to move him at his apex of value. And we had feelers out to several clubs. Our price was high, and we made it known what the price was for one of the great players in Major League Baseball, and Juan Soto, and the Padres were the team that matched it, and we made a deal, and I think it was a good deal for both franchises. They got what they wanted. They got one of the best players in the big leagues and a good first baseman for a half a year, and we rebuilt our farm system, and we think that we have a handful of players from that trade that will be the core of our next championship club.
Yeah, it's shortstop, starting pitcher, and a star outfielder, at least it looks like it. What is your approach to the trade deadline? You're only 4 out of the last wild card, but you've got 4 clubs between you and that last spot. So, Mike, what is your approach toward the deadline?
Well, I think we're going to take our time with it. We've got 4 weeks to the trade deadline and see where we're at. Where all these teams are at in the standings with that extra wild card spot. You're a week of hot baseball away from being in a playoff contention. So we're going to keep our powder dry and make our decisions close to the deadline, and we'll make prudent decisions for not only this year but for our future. And we think that our championship window is starting to. We're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting to see a beginnings of a roster that we feel that can contend in a very difficult National League East division. But when we're running out 4 young, controllable starting pitchers that we developed here in the big leagues, and 3 or 4 young core everyday players, position player wise, and where our real prospect capital is down in the farm. We think that we've got several impact players that are going to be in the big leagues in the near future. So and playoff and payroll flexibility. So we think that the lights, we see the end of the tunnel. We see light out there, and we're going to be as aggressive as we've been in the past to put a championship caliber club on the field.
Yeah. So I would think they're 4.5 out of the wild card now. With the loss last night, they're 6 games under 500. The likelihood that they get real hot this month, and when the trade deadline comes up, I think it's August 1st, that they're going to be buyers. I don't think that's going to happen. I think you trade anybody who you don't think is necessarily part of your future to load up on prospects. They're starting to bear fruit here. You had C.J. Abrams. He's now your leadoff guy. He's your shortstop. Hopefully he's going to stay there for another 7 or 8 years. Maybe they'll sign him to a contract extension, though he's under team control for, I think, another 4 or 5. So they're in good shape with him. He's hitting .284, scored 2 runs last night. Mackenzie Gore pitched well. He went 5 1/3. He gave up just 1 run. His ERA very solid, 3.47. And then we've seen now the debut of James Wood. So the Juan Soto trade, while it seemed insane to trade maybe the best player in the game at a young age with even 2 years of team control still ahead, 2.5 really, because they traded him at the deadline, you're starting to see where you're getting good value for him. And Barry Svrluga even points out today in his column that it's not impossible that the Lerners make a big push to get Soto when he hits free agency after the season. I think he's going to re-sign with the Yankees. I think that's a spot for him. Yankees will come up with the money, even though they're Hank Steinbrenner is crying poor right now. They'll make a deal. But, if you really want to knock it out of the park, Juan Soto comes back on that $500 million deal. And, as they say, the rest is history. We'll see how that works out. By the way, not in the lineup last night for the Mets, outfielder Brandon Nimmo. And this goes down as one of those very odd baseball circumstances. It seems that he was in the hotel. They were, getting ready for the start of the series yesterday. So this was real early in the morning on Monday, about 5:15 in the morning. Felt the leg cramp as he got up from the toilet, walked over to the sink for a drink of water, and fainted. Had a cut on his head. It was bleeding. Finally, he called the team trainer about 20 minutes later, and they were able to stop the bleeding. They sent him to the hospital for evaluation. They gave him concussion tests, everything. Everything came back negative, CT scan, EKG, the whole thing. And he had a small bandage on his head before the game yesterday. Didn't need stitches and expects to play tonight. And he says doctors told him that incidents like that occur more often than you think. Could be, dehydration, playing in this heat, and you get a cramp. And because you haven't had enough water, you faint. I'm not a doctor here, but it's just one of those strange things that can happen to you. But I was thinking about things that have happened to visiting teams. Nothing will ever top this. As the Nationals were getting ready for their opener against the Phillies on April 13th of 2009, so we're going back 15 years now. Hard to believe it's been that long. But anyway, Phillies were in. Harry Kalas, the longtime TV broadcaster, getting ready to do the game, and he passed out in the booth and later died of a heart attack. And, thank God everything's okay with Brandon Nimmo. But, you think about those kind of things. And Harry Kalas was a heavy smoker. He was only 73 when he passed away. And, this happened. So thank God everything is going to be okay with Brandon Nimmo, and they expect him back in the lineup tonight as that series continues. Coming up, Greg Cosell doing a podcast in Philadelphia suggesting that with Cliff Kingsbury in as the offensive coordinator doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see this wild spread offense. He makes a case that you could see a very much of a run-based attack with Kingsbury running the show. We'll get to his thoughts on that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
There was a time when the NBA season wrapped up in April. It got stretched out to May. When the Bullets won the championship in 78, it was the latest it ever went, to June 7th. But by and large, it was over, before we hit summer. And aside from one day for the draft, nobody really paid any attention to the NBA till it got started again in November. Well, it's not that way anymore. We got the NBA Finals now wrapping up in late June. That segues into the draft. And right out of the draft, we hit free agency. And that is dominating the news right now. What's going on? There's, these older guys moving on. Does Klay Thompson have anything left in the tank? Are we actually going to see Paul George perform in the playoffs? He's he called himself a playoff Paul or whatever he calls himself. He's not a playoff guy, but those are the guys that are on the move now. Sometimes we have a year like Kevin Durant moving to Golden State. The most famous one, maybe the biggest of all time, was the LeBron taking my talents to South Beach. But there's a lot to chew on, and we'll get to more of that in the 10 o'clock hour. I want to do a little football here with this story from the Post today that D.C. has made a bid to host the 2027 NFL Draft. Now, they tried to get it this year, wound up in Detroit, been a rousing success there. They reported, they're saying, who knows how they counted these people, but they're saying that over a 3-day period in April, Detroit drew 775,000 people to watch the draft. That's Woodstock. That's football Woodstock. And, this happened by accident. This is really crazy. I remember going in the days when they would have it at Radio City Music Hall, and they would have a section for fans. But, basically it was teams at tables, and it wasn't very exciting. They would have some prospects there, and it was just sort of, okay. I guess they did televise it, but it didn't seem to have the effect that it has now. So this happens totally by accident. It's a nice, controlled TV environment there. They've been doing it there for years. They know how to set it up and so forth. But then we find out in 2015 that Radio City Music Hall has a scheduling conflict. The NFL goes, what do we do? So they said, well, let's put it in another place. Let's see what happens in Chicago. And they had it there, and they couldn't believe the amount of people who showed up for that. They did it again in 2016 in Chicago, and other cities went, whoa, we'd like to do this. I remember Philadelphia 2017. That's when the thing really exploded. And it's amazing. People standing around for hours with their faces painted, with team gear on, and all they're waiting for is that one moment when they find out who their draft pick is. And in most cases, unless it's a high-profile quarterback or wide receiver, it's somebody they never heard of. It could be a running back or a defensive back or an offensive lineman. But they freak out about this stuff. So the NFL realized, we're really on to something here. So they moved it to Arlington, Texas. 2018. It went to Nashville in 2019. Cleveland got it in 2021. Vegas 2022. Kansas City 2023. And then Detroit. They didn't do it anywhere in 2020 because of the pandemic. It was done, I think, from Roger Goodell's basement, as I remember. But now it's a happening. People want it, and DC wants it badly. They want to have it on the mall. The league, according to the emails that the Post obtained, proposed having the main stage for the draft on 4th Street between Madison and Jefferson near the National Gallery of Art and the National Air and Space Museum. A portion could also be held on Pennsylvania Avenue where attendees could flow to the mall. Now, this is a 2-night, one-day event, really. It starts on Thursday night. Then they have Friday night where they have rounds 2 and 3, and then it all wraps up on Saturday. And, I assume that they can shut everything down and host this on a Thursday afternoon going into Thursday night, and they think that this will be big for the district. It certainly will. You have fans from all over the country coming in. Plus, you'll have this great television audience watching a city that has, been under siege at times, and people have been very critical of the crime and so forth. This would be a really nice thing. They drew 12.1 million viewers this year for the draft in Detroit. That's more than any World Series or Stanley Cup Finals game, more than all but one of the NBA Finals, and all but one college football regular season game from last year. So that would be a nice little cool event, not little, but big event to have in D.C., which would be, I guess, in April of 2027. I don't know where it's going to be this year or next year, but it is a happening, and it's been growing in momentum, and to have more than 750,000 people showing up to watch it, really something. Greg Cosell works for NFL Films. He probably studies more tape of NFL players than anyone else. College players coming into the NFL, has been very complimentary of what he's seen and what he's heard about Jayden Daniels. He's on a podcast, which I guess he does on a regular basis. It's called Inside the Birds. It's more focused on the Eagles, but they're looking at division teams. It's hosted by Greg Mosher and Adam Kaplan, who used to work for ESPN. And they got to talking about the Commanders the other day, and the subject of what the offense is going to look like under Cliff Kingsbury came up. And when you think of Kingsbury, you think of the offense that he ran at Texas Tech when he had Patrick Mahomes, the classic spread. This is a team that, surprisingly, with Eric Bieniemy, who had played running back in college and in the pros and had worked with Andy Reid, decided that he was going to air it out all the time with a rookie quarterback who couldn't be protected behind a terrible offensive line. And if you listen to what Cosell says here, looks like even with a coach in Cliff Kingsbury who's known for this spread, it could be a lot more ground and pound than you think.
It's a misnomer or a misconception to assume that he's just a spread guy. That's what he was when he came into the NFL. But when he was with Arizona, and I'm sure you guys remember, they did not have a plethora of quality wide receivers. They were actually better at the tight end position. So he ended up playing a lot more out of 12 personnel with 2 tight ends. So I think Cliff Kingsbury, no matter what one might think of him as a head coach, who knows, we were not out there, but as an offensive coach, I think he's willing to adapt to his personnel. And the big question they're going to have is who's going to be their number 3 wide receiver. They did draft Luke McCaffrey. Now, Luke McCaffrey has not played wide receiver for a long period of time. Ideally, would they like him to be their 3rd wide receiver? Yes, and there's a toughness that he showed watching his tape, his willingness to work the middle of the field when there were bodies around him and make tough, physical, contested catches. But we don't know the answer to that yet just because he doesn't have a lot of experience. So given that we mentioned Ben Sinnott, they did sign Zach Ertz. For all we know, Adam, they could line up early on, try to run the football with 2 tight ends. He's shown that he's willing to do that based on the personnel at his disposal.
Interesting. Yeah, so let's talk about that running game. It's an interesting one with Brian Robinson, and then you combine that with the addition of Austin Eckler. Do you see this as a 1st and 2nd down run game with Robinson, 3rd down pass catching back with Eckler? Does Chris Rodriguez fit it. Did I say that right? Is it Chris Rodriguez?
Yes, it's Chris Rodriguez.
Chris Rodriguez.
Yeah.
Does he fit in? Because I saw him a little bit last year. I think he got a little bit of time and looked kind of like an interesting prospect.
Yeah, they're all the same. They're all physical power type backs. Just another thought that hit me as you were mentioning the backs is Eckler's a really good receiver, and throughout his career, he's been able to detach from the formation and be a factor. Could we see personnel packages where Brian Robinson is the back in the backfield and Eckler is on the field at the same time and he's detached? Again, you're looking to see how the defense might react to something like that from a personnel and coverage standpoint. But basically, all these backs, including Eckler, are kind of inside grinders, and they're sustaining backs. Robinson, I like Brian Robinson. I think he's a little more than that, but we'll have to wait and see. He had some really good moments his first couple of years in the league. We'll see how he continues to develop. Rodriguez was a 6th-round pick a year ago because there's no real explosiveness to his game. Again, he's a sustaining grinder. So that's what their backfield is at this moment, and that's what they have. And I imagine they'll play to it. As I said, they do not want Daniels to have to be a factor throwing the ball as much, but he's also a factor in the run game because now you get into all those run game elements, the zone reads, the RPOs. I'm sure they'll use him to try to get him on the perimeter with the quarterback sweeps. So Daniels factors into the run game as well, and then that dictates how defenses have to line up and play.
Yeah, Greg, I thought it was a really good point you made. And just looking at this league as a whole and how coaches do it, you coach to the personnel you have.
Yeah.
Because if Kingsbury has 4 really good receivers, and we'll see about Dyami Brown, who's in the final years deal and how he fits in. Olamide Zaccheaus comes over from Philly, formerly of Atlanta. But if you don't feel great about your group, sometimes you have to play to your personnel. And you mentioned Ben Sinnott, John Bates is there. Monty Rogers, I know they really like, but he coming off an knee injury. Cole Turner's there, is pretty athletic.
Yeah.
We'll see. I had not thought, I forgot you told me this a couple of years ago, that in Kingsbury's latter years with the Cardinals, he started going for more 12 personnel.
Because that's what he had.
Yeah, you just go by what you had. So, I had not thought they may do that. Yeah, they may have to do that. You got to coach to what you have.
Keep in mind, again, that third wide receiver is an open spot right now. We know Terry McLaurin. Dotson has not quite lived up to the billing. They are obviously hoping he can develop with a new coaching staff. As I said, they drafted Luke McCaffrey. Who knows about Dyami Brown at this point in his career? I mean, he's going into his 4th year, and he's had a flash here and there. They don't have much more than that at the moment. Now, again, OTAs, mini camps, training camps, sometimes guys pop and, you go, oh, this guy, he's going to play. But they have John Bates, who's actually a really solid dual tight end in that he's a really good blocker and he's not a bad receiver, not explosive. The previous coaching staff and organization drafted Cole Turner. He's a long, athletic tight end who can work the vertical seams. So we don't know exactly what their foundation will be.
That's Greg Cosell on speculation as to what the Cliff Kingsbury offense will look like here, not necessarily what we've seen in the past in college and his days with the Arizona Cardinals. I don't think it would disappoint Dan Quinn very much if they were a run-oriented attack, because defensive coaches love that. Eats up the clock, keeps the defense off the field. And it would take some pressure off of Jaden Daniels. And the less he has to run, one of the things they've been talking about throughout the offseason is he needs to learn how to protect himself. And if he's handing off, he's not as likely to be hit. If they can be a team that is a little bit, more run-oriented than they have been in the past, with the weapons to hit the deep ball with Terry McLaurin and others, this Zach Ertz thing, it's fine that he's here, but Zach Ertz is an aging tight end. It's not like there was a lot of interest in him around the league. He had been cut by Arizona. He wound up with Detroit, and had they made it to the Super Bowl, would have played there. But, he's a guy that was pretty much on the street, and maybe he can resuscitate his career with Cliff Kingsbury. I don't know. But if it's going to be a thing where Brian Robinson is leading in carries, and then you have Austin Eckler, who you can use as a third down back, and sometimes Jaden Daniels runs the ball but protects himself. I don't think that's a bad thing. And based on the pass-happy attack that they had last year, where they were just getting Sam Howell getting killed on every down and leading the league in sacks and all the other problems that they had offensively, and they had a healthy Brian Robinson last year. It wasn't like he was hurt. So I think that makes a lot of sense. One more on football here. John Gruden, not Jay Gruden, but John Gruden, lost an attempt for the Nevada Supreme Court to reconsider whether contract interference and conspiracy, that was the lawsuit that he filed against the NFL after he resigned, should be heard in court or in private arbitration. If it goes to arbitration, who does it go to? Why, it goes to Roger Goodell, and he doesn't want that to happen. This lawsuit goes back to 2021, November 2021. He alleged that the league forced him to resign from the Raiders by leaking racist, sexist, and homophobic emails that he sent many years earlier when he was at ESPN. Roger Goodell named a defendant in the case. He said he wants to burn the NFL down. I don't think that's going to happen here, and they're going to out-lawyer him, which it looks like they're on their way to doing. But remember, he left the team in 2021 with 6 seasons left on a 10-year, $100 million contract. And this goes back to some emails which Dan Snyder and his wife denied leaking, but I don't think you can believe them on anything. And these were emails that were sent between 2011 and 2018 to Bruce Allen, and they were sexist and homophobic and racist, all that. And they found these emails. The emails were among 650,000 emails that the league obtained during their workplace investigation of Washington, of the team. And there is every reason to believe that Dan Snyder leaked these emails. Why? As reported by Don Van Natta in an explosive piece that he did in October of 2022, which I think really greased the skids for Snyder to be out. He said that what Snyder was attempting to do by leaking these emails about John Gruden was he wanted to curry favor with Roger Goodell, who he knew hated Gruden. And he said, here's some dirt on him, in an effort to protect himself, to be able to hold on to the team. And that kind of backfired on him. And that's what led to the Mary Jo White investigation, which led to him selling the team. So, Snyder was very self-destructive. That's about the only thing that saved us as fans, was that he managed to screw things up for himself, and now he's out. But Gruden is now seeking monetary damages, alleging that the selective disclosure of the emails, think about that. He pulled out these emails from 650,000. What are there, a couple dozen? How did he do that? That they were selectively disclosed. They were also published by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And Dan Snyder had hired a PR person during all this who had connections to the New York Times, and the New York Times wrote a puff piece about him about that time. Why? Probably in a quid pro quo, so he would release these emails. And doesn't really, I think, look good for John Gruden right now, but the damage was done, and it was done by Dan Snyder to him, and fortunately, it worked out in a way that it boomeranged and hit Snyder back in the face. Get to more on the NBA coming up, the free agency, also what Jay Billis had to say, his backstory, and much more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Oh, we spent some time on the debut of James Wood in the last hour. Maybe years from now, we'll look back on last night and say, wow, that's where it all started. It wasn't Steven Strasburg, which was one of the toughest tickets we've ever had in town when he made his debut in 2010, but they did draw 26,000 at Nats Park, and in his first at-bat, he had a single, smoked it through the infield, also walked, played well in left field, and maybe he's going to stay there for a while. We had said that about Juan Soto, and he wound up coming here in the Juan Soto deal. So maybe the way baseball works these days, at some point, a superstar, James Wood, will be traded for a bunch of prospects, and they'll rebuild. But it'd be nice if they could win with him in between, which is what they did with Soto. And we're off and running with that. It does look, though, that the Nats lost last night, 9-7 in 10 innings to the Mets, and they're 6 games under 500, 4.5 out of the wild card. It looks, most likely they're going to be sellers in a month when the trade deadline comes. But Mike Rizzo was on the MLB, I want to say NFL, MLB network yesterday, and he said that, hey, a couple of hot weeks, hot month might change some things. But I think more than likely they'll be selling off people that they do not think will be necessarily part of their long-term future for more prospects. And we're seeing these prospects ripen. 3 players that they got in the Soto trade, big factors with this team right now. C.J. Abrams looks like he's going to be an all-star shortstop. He had 2 runs scored last night, made a spectacular play in the field, and as looks like he could be there for a long, long time. And Mackenzie Gore is developing into a very solid pitcher, maybe eventually an all-star pitcher. And if James Wood is all James Wood is cracked up to be, then down the line he could be an all-star player. He's 21 years old. That's pretty remarkable, and he's 6'7". We don't see outfielders that big outside of Aaron Judge, right? I mean, he's really athletic. I grew up watching Frank Howard, and even though he was an All-American basketball player and drafted in the NBA, I wouldn't necessarily describe him as athletic. He was strong and powerful and hit monster home runs, but that's not what we see in James Wood. James Wood, yes, hits home runs, big home runs, but runs like a gazelle, runs the bases, plays the outfield. I don't think is going to be transitioned, despite his size, to first base. I think he's there to stay in the outfield. And Mike Rizzo said it's conceivable that someday he could be playing center field. And I think about something that Tom Lavero said about DC and why baseball needs this kind of a boost. Tom is very dedicated to the D.C. Grays, which is a Washington, D.C. team in the Wooden Bat League, the Cal Ripken League. And they pay homage to the Negro League team, the Homestead Grays, which played a lot of games. They played a lot of games at Griffith Stadium back in the days of the Negro League. But I remember Tom talking about this years ago, that he thought if Michael A. Taylor could develop into a star, that would be such a boost for baseball. An African-American, and Taylor was a great outfielder, still playing, I think, just had real problems with strikeouts, couldn't get on base enough, but he said that was a guy he thought if he could become a star, that would really help this team, particularly in this area. And James Wood might become that guy. On top of everything else, he's local. He grew up in Olney, played baseball at St. John's and basketball, and was drafted by the Padres, but boomerangs back here in the Soto trade. And this could be the start of what they say is a beautiful friendship. We'll see how that works out. The NBA stuff, the Celtics are for sale. Seems odd, right? I mean, they just won the NBA championship. But I guess, buy low, sell high. And Wyc Grousbeck bought the team for $360 million when he bought the team. Okay, yeah, here it was, 2002. So just over 20 years ago, paid $360 million. According to Forbes, the Celtics are the 4th most valuable team, estimated value of $4.7 billion. The bar was recently set with the Phoenix Suns, where Matt Ishbia in 2022 paid $4 billion for him. Now, according to Forbes, the Celtics would be worth $4.7 billion. Of course, rarely do teams come up, so it's quite likely that they would pass $5 billion. In terms of value, the Lakers are considered to be the most valuable team at $6.4 billion. The Knicks at $6.6 billion. Okay, so it's the Golden State Warriors are considered to be the most valuable, $7.7 billion. Knicks number 2 at $6.6, and Lakers $6.4. I guess because Golden State's been so good and because they have a new place to play in San Francisco, maybe that has something to do with it. But Boston is paying luxury taxes. They're just signing Jason Tatum to an extension, so he and Jaylen Brown will make between them $600 million in salary. They paid $50 million in luxury taxes, and will be paying maybe even more than that coming up. So it's just as I say, mind-boggling that you would sell the Celtics at this time. But there's that. Now, as for Golden State, this looks like the end of the dynasty. And Klay Thompson reportedly has signed a deal to play with the Dallas Mavericks. It's a 3-year deal, and they're working out a sign and trade. We don't have the specifics of it yet. Kind of interesting that it ends this way because they did manage to keep the big three together. Draymond Green, Steph Curry's still there, of course, but Klay Thompson goes. And Curry said at the end of the season, I could never see myself not with these two guys, meaning Draymond and Klay. He said, I understand this league changes. There are so many things that go into it. We're not going to play forever, but we've experienced so much together at the end of the day. I know they want to win. I know I want to win. That's all I'm worried about. Well, it looks like Curry at 36 is going to finish up on either a bad team or got a thought on that in just a moment. But this was yesterday on PTI. Tony and Mike discussing the move where Thompson makes the move from Golden State to Dallas, and Chris Paul, who had been released by the Suns, he's now going to wind up with the San Antonio Spurs. This was their take on it yesterday.
Thompson reportedly plans to join the Mavericks on a 3-year, $50 million deal. This ends a 13-year run with Golden State that produced 4 titles. Chris Paul is also gone from the Warriors, signing a 1-year, $11 million deal with the Spurs. Wilbon, where do you want to start?
Well, I'm going to be brief on Chris Paul, since he's on the screen right now. I mean, Chris Paul obviously going to really help teach Wembanyama how to play, the ins and outs of this. Chris did this so successfully recently with Oklahoma City before he went to Phoenix with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander still calls Chris Paul to say, what do I do? He's still his mentor. He's 2 teams later, now 3 teams later. Chris Paul going to be great at that. He's working with Pop. Pop, I know, loves Chris Paul. Okay, good for them and good for San Antonio. I know Chris won't be there by the time San Antonio cashes in, but that's on the move there. Klay Thompson, one of the most important players in the league the last 10 years. Tony, it's been rest in peace Golden State for a couple of years since they won that title in 22. But it's interesting. He's going to have a chance playing with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving and that Dallas situation, Jason Kidd. I mean, this is an interesting situation for Klay. I know he isn't the great player he was 6, 7, 8 years ago. I know that.
Yeah.
But he still can shoot 40% from 3, and he's going to be open a lot playing with Luka Doncic, and he's going to have space on the floor playing with Doncic and Kyrie. Interesting situation for Klay Thompson to move into.
I'm going to go over all the same things you just did. Klay Thompson going to the Mavericks is good for the Mavericks because Luka Doncic will get him the ball where he wants the ball. It's good for them offensively. If I'm not mistaken, Mike, Dallas didn't even get to 100 points in any of the 4 games they lost against Boston.
That's right.
And they needed points because Kyrie Irving had a terrible final series. The larger story here is the end of the Golden State Warriors. It is official now. They were a great team, and it's over. Nobody ever called Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green a big 3. Nobody ever said that. And yet, if you compare them to teams that went out and got a big 3 in the last 15 years, they had many more titles, many more. He wanted to get paid somewhere else. Okay, I understand that. I think he's on the back end of his career.
He is.
I think by the end of next year, people will say he's over the hill, which leads me to Chris Paul, who, and you're 100% right, he is going to San Antonio as a player coach. He's 39. He's way over the hill. He's a museum piece. He can only play 20 minutes a game, but, and I emphasize this but, he is going to show Victor Wembanyama what a good lead guard can do by getting you the ball where you need the ball. So, and when the Spurs are ready to contend, as you said, he's going to be long gone. But this is a teaching moment for Wembanyama.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Wembanyama ought to be grateful. By the way, I'm going to stick up for my friend, Chris Paul. If he's a museum piece, he's the Louvre. All right? Because DeAndre Ayton got to the finals and looked like a real player with Chris Paul, and since then you haven't heard from him. So Chris Paul knows he's going to be demanding.
I'm just saying he's way over the hill.
But so it's a lot of movement that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, Chris Paul, though, is 39 years old. That's it's going to be helpful for the Spurs as they develop Wembanyama, and there's no pressure to win right now. But it looks like Chris Paul's going to end his career without a championship. It's trending in that direction. And, he's going to be a Hall of Fame player. He's made gazillions of dollars playing and doing all those commercials for State Farm. But, he's been chasing the title in different places for all these years. Hasn't worked out. Now, the one player left, well, Draymond's still there. But Steph Curry, 36, is going to win again in Golden State. Now without Klay Thompson, aging team, getting older. Here's something interesting, and Steve Kerr addressed this the other day as they're getting ready for the Olympic team. He's coaching the Olympic team, as you know, and we're going to have LeBron playing with Steph. LeBron has said that he'd like to play with Steph. Now, it looked like at one point he might join the Golden State Warriors. There were overtures to get Klay. Klay it's different. It's going to be a sign-and-trade situation. And, it's most likely that Steph Curry will be a one-franchise player, that he will finish his career with the Golden State Warriors. But, nowadays, if you're a big enough superstar, you can go where you want to go, and they could make it happen. Could you see a possibility? How about this? Could you see a possibility? I don't, but just throwing it out there, where there is some kind of a deal that's made where Steph Curry winds up with the Lakers, with LeBron, with Anthony Davis, with J.J. Redick as the head coach, and they try and win together. Now, Lakers have tried this before. They took in an aging Karl Malone and Gary Payton with Kobe and Shaq, and they didn't win. So, it's not a guarantee you do it with these older guys. But Curry's still a great player, and LeBron, who's 39, is still a great player. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen, and it probably financially can happen, but wouldn't that be something if Steph Curry leaves Golden State and goes to the Lakers and finishes his career there, and there's one last hurrah with LeBron, and they win a championship together? Probably not going to happen, but just throwing it out there. Then there's the Paul George situation, and Paul George, for all the hype about him, he doesn't win, and he's hurt all the time. But he's going to Philadelphia to join Joel Embiid, who's hurt all the time. When he plays, he's great, but he's hurt a lot. How's this going to work out? Tony and Mike with their view of George making the move across the country from the Clippers to the Sixers.
So what does this do for the Sixers, and where does it leave the Clippers?
Let me emphasize something here. Klay Thompson is going to go to the Hall of Fame at some point. He's getting $17 million a year on a new deal. Paul George is getting $53 million a year on a new deal. You and I disagree about Paul George. Paul George has been in the NBA for 14 years. He has never been to the finals. He gave himself this nickname, Playoff P, which is a joke because he's not a particularly good playoff player. People are going to say, oh, now he's going to the Sixers. He's going to be with an MVP in Joel Embiid and a rising star, right, in Tyrese Maxey, who you like a lot.
Yes.
And they're going to be really good. And my answer to that is exactly why. He's coming from a team where one guy on the team, Kawhi Leonard, actually has won 2 championships. And another guy on the team, James Harden, has been an MVP. And what did they do? They did nothing. So I don't know why Paul George necessarily is going to be a salvation for the Sixers. Joel Embiid, Mike, as you know, has a track record. He gets hurt every year. He is never healthy in the playoffs. That's just the way it is. He's not healthy in the playoffs. And so to me, He's not only not been to a final, he's never been to a conference final. I don't know why people automatically think they're better than Boston, better than the Knicks, and even better than Milwaukee. I don't get it.
Nobody thinks they're better than Boston, and a lot of people are better than Milwaukee, because in case you haven't noticed, Milwaukee's gone out and is out. Milwaukee's not even in the conversation.
I know, but they could come back.
And nobody's saying they're better than Boston because Boston just won. But what they did is insert themselves in the picture, at least with the Knicks and the Pacers underneath Boston. And Paul George, Tony, look, I know he hasn't won anything. A lot of people haven't won anything. Jerry West didn't win anything until the end of his career, and we're not going to say Jerry doesn't mean they won one late, and he'd be the first one to tell you that because he always was.
One more than Paul George.
So Paul George is a really good player. And if you're the Philadelphia 76ers and you got Joel Embiid, who is hurt all the time, you got to maximize Joel Embiid's potential now. Talk about a small window. You're trying to thread a needle, but you better go out and spend the money. They cleared the money by letting Harden go, and Harden isn't a particularly great teammate. Sometimes he is, sometimes he isn't. George, it seems to me, is that
player.
All right, and Paul George with Maxey, and they got a little bit more with Drummond, and they kept Oubre, and they've got who else? They got Aaron Gordon. They didn't sort of bankrupt the team to put somebody out there that can challenge the Knicks. And here's what the Knicks don't have, since you're going to extol their virtues while you wouldn't do it all spring. They don't have anybody who can look Joel Embiid eye to eye since they lost their best big man just now. So the Sixers are in play. They're not as good as Boston, and no one's saying that.
Let me go to the top of the question. The top of the question is, what does it do with the Clippers as well?
Gordon.
The Clippers are a disaster, okay?
Yeah.
James Harden is a worse playoff player than Paul George. Kawhi Leonard is always hurt. Mike, what they do, that it is the fallacy of thinking that if you put three good players together, you're going to roll over everybody. No,
new building.
No, it doesn't happen.
They'll fill it anyway.
Doesn't happen.
So that's Tony and Mike on the free agency move. Now, remember that the Sixers are owned by Josh Harris, who spent $6 billion to buy a football team just over a year ago. Isn't stopping him spending money. It seems like an awful lot of money for Paul George, $50 million a year, 4 years, $212 million. He also re-signed Tyrese Maxey, 5 years, $204 million, and you know what they're paying Embiid. So they're going for it with those three guys. We'll see how it works out. But that's just, it's just mind-boggling amount of money. And that's, I guess, the cost of doing business in the NBA. And obviously, he's found a way to do it. It's not like he had to pawn his car to buy the to buy the Commanders. Mike Callow sits in for Tony next. I will see you back here tomorrow morning, coming up at 9 a.m.